Hey everybody, welcome back. Wayne here. Have you ever wondered why your spouse cheated? I know that sounds like a ridiculous question because I know all of you have. Why is probably the most consistent question that gets asked. I hear it multiple times a day, often from the same person multiple times a day. And I'm going to explore with you a little bit today of why your spouse strayed, why they cheated. How do you begin to reconcile the unfaithful spouse's behavior when it seems so contradictory to their past? And how do you wrap your mind around such this foreign, out of the blue behavior? And if you're asking that question or a multitude of others, and probably even making yourself a little bit crazy with the same question over and over and over again about your spouse, I just want to reassure you, you're not alone. And like I said, I'm going to take a shot at some of the most common questions, but keep in mind, this is a limited time and it won't be the exhaustive answers, but I'll do my best to speak to the issues that I hear most commonly. For more help though, I'd really encourage you to visit the Affair Recovery Library. It is so comprehensive around this topic. So the first, why did they do it? And how could they do it at the same time, still want to be with me and love me? I hear that all the time. And for starters, a key principle in life, and certainly in understanding infidelity, is the concept that behavior does not equal motive. How often have you done something that you didn't want to do? It happens all the time. And while infidelity is this horrible and gut-wrenching, it's certainly something that people can get into and then discover, this is not what I want. I didn't want this at all. All too frequently, we follow our emotions falsely and believing that we want something only to discover that once we have it, it's not what we wanted, not what we wanted at all. But in the moment of truth, when the mistake is discovered, it can seem like it's too late. And loyalty bonds have been broken, hearts shattered and crushed. Vows have been shattered. And I believe firmly that lives can be healed. But at the beginning, it's convincing the parties that the lives can be restored. That's the biggest challenge of all at the very beginning of recovery. For the hurt spouse, the question to the cheating spouse remains pretty consistent. How could you? How could you really do this if you cared for me? The fact is, caring has little or nothing to do with what they've done. What they did happened in spite of caring. A tragic yet ever so poignant aspect of this situation is how they actually reveal to the unfaithful mate what they really wanted all along. In fact, the larger issue is usually for the hurt spouse. It may be painful to believe their mate really does care about them, maybe impossible even, because then they might be compelled to consider re-entering the relationship. Time, expert help, and proper reconciliation efforts are the only commodities which can reveal the truth in the end. If you're what they really want, then they'll go the distance and give you the necessary space to heal. Another question is, what does the other person have that I don't have? I hear that pretty often. There's no way to determine right now that a lifetime can be spent searching for the why. There are as many reasons why as there are stars in the sky. The complexity lies, though, in the multitude of factors driving that choice for the cheating spouse. For some, the infidelity is caused by unhealed and unresolved wounds or baggage brought into the marriage from childhood and adolescence or other relationship. At other times, it's unhealthy response patterns to other problems in the marriage. And rather than addressing these issues head on, many unfaithful spouses use some form of infidelity as a solution to or an escape from their problems. At times, it's about an addiction. And at times it's even situational where someone does something careless in the moment and then feels trapped and unable to get out of it or disentangle themselves from the situation they put themselves in. Please hear me, I'm certainly not minimizing harmful or hurtful behaviors, but it is very possible to end up where you don't want to be and then be absolutely lost on actually how to get out of that, how to salvage the situation and the marriage. See that all the time. Typically, though, people enjoy how the affair partner makes them feel about themselves. Affair partners tend to serve as this vanity mirror. It's like casting this image of ourselves, how we want to look or how we think we look, good, pretty, whatever. And the spouse is usually like the makeup mirror that's magnifying and highlighting all our flaws and our blemishes. This is why the affair partner seems to be the preferred commodity. But in the long run, it's really, really just an illusion. And eventually the negatives and the baggage show up all over again. It's always the same. So why would they risk their married life here with me for this cheap passion with someone else who's so messed up? And can't they see how unrealistic this relationship really is? In all honesty, there's a good chance that the person who's acting out isn't even thinking about risking a life of calm and connection and serenity or this excitement of being with someone new or someone else. This compartmentalization that most betrayers and even addicts utilize separates the two realities in their mind. The risk is part of what brings the adrenaline and the excitement, but the reality of losing everything that they hold dear doesn't really hold any weight in that moment. At one level, they may be aware that they could lose everything. But the reality of that possibility doesn't really register in their minds. I know it seems literally incomprehensible to the betrayed. However, it is a very real mindset in the betrayer when they fall into that. I know that it is a difficult concept to explain to someone who's not an addict. It's a bit like trying to describe light or color to a blind person. You can tell them what it's like, but unless you experience it, then it's really, really hard to believe or understand that someone could think this way. Please don't hear me say this as an excuse or a justification for this type of behavior. It is absolutely not. The person who lives like this still does know what they're doing is wrong. They do. And there are ways to deal with their reality. But in truth, they have to make that choice on their own. I believe we have free will and choice, and that is the fundamental thing to all of us. We can't help and create opportunities for them to come out of this haze of their choices, but it requires their own commitment to the process as well. Asking the question why men cheat and why women cheat may really be asking the question, why do people cheat and have no guilt regarding their actions? Really, only a very small percentage of the population experience little to no guilt when acting out. The vast majority feel some prick of consciousness, but they use these defense mechanisms to push that guilt away. If you remember, I did a whole series on moral justifications a few months ago. Your spouse may need to go review that again, because they can use defense mechanisms such as blaming, victim thinking, minimization, rationalization, or even denial as a way to justify their actions and push away the guilt. And if they have resentments toward their spouse, they may justify their actions by feeling that their spouse deserves it for their lack of concern for their desires emotionally or sexually or in some kind of intimacy. If they've been doing the behavior for a longer period of time, their heart may have become hardened to the behavior and it no longer seems that bad, at least to them. And a lack of remorse doesn't mean that they don't have a conscience. It can be an indication that somehow in their mind, they have to come up with a way to justify what they've done in order to avoid taking responsibility for their failure. Another common question is, did they really love me? This one is really hard to answer, and it all depends on how you define love, really. And one thing is for certain, if someone betrays their spouse, I know what they've done is not loving. However, I believe that every human being is capable of loving someone and at the same time, in a moment of selfishness or being triggered, we will act in ways that are contrary to love. I think we've all done that. And loving your mate in no way precludes you from being angry with them and saying something that is hurtful. I understand that saying something hurtful certainly isn't in even the same league as betrayal. But if your love for your mate isn't sufficient to keep you from acting in ways that are unloving or contrary to love towards them, then their love for you may not be sufficient to keep them from doing something hurtful to you. On the other hand, I believe many of us, including cheating spouses, have a very shallow understanding of love. They get married thinking that they love their mate, but in reality, they love how their mate makes them feel about themselves. We've all done this to some degree. And if that's the case, they will continue in that relationship as long as the marriage continues to make them happy. But if for whatever reason, the marriage ceases to make them happy, or if they find someone else or something else that makes them feel even better, then it won't be long until the allure of doing something else begins to draw them elsewhere. And if that occurs, does it mean they never loved you? I don't think so. Again, it's hard to know another person's heart, but it is possible that their journey into the forbidden may also have opened their eyes and helped them to realize that you're what they really loved, what they really wanted, what they really cherished. And at this point, their reality begins to shift. And it's a teeter-totter, really, of guilt, despair, confusion, as what to do next and to try to save the marriage. At the very least, if they are choosing to work on the relationship, I believe that their betrayal and your response may be the very thing that begins to teach them, really all of us, the true meaning of love and open up a door for a true reconciliation. I know this type of restoration is possible. I see it every day. And I've seen it with my own marriage, as well as countless others who endeavor to merely, give the marriage a chance to be restored. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard both men and women state if they had known the consequences of their action before they had acted, they would never have done this. A few years ago, I was in Home Depot and I ran into an old friend of mine who I knew had an affair with an employee. And he left his wife and his kids were all in high school. And he even was forced out of his job and he had to move to another state. And he was back visiting and I just happened to run into him and his words just are so clear still to this day. He goes, Wayne, if I knew what I knew now, I never would have done. My kids don't want to have anything to do with me unless they need something. I lost my best friend of a 30-year marriage. He didn't know what he didn't know, but he does now. And that's just one example of many times where I hear stories like that. I just think that very few people rightly consider all the cost when they act out, for your sake and for theirs. And I wish they had been thinking, I truly do. I'd have a lot less business, but the world would be a better place, a safer place if we considered the cost of our actions. And regardless of how you've arrived at this point in your attempts at reconciliation or healing, I want you to know there is hope for both of you today. The carelessness and the callousness of your spouse, or the unrelenting pain and hurt that you feel, doesn't at any level disqualify you from being able to find hope and healing and a restored love for yourself, for your spouse, for God. It isn't easy, and it's certainly not overnight. But despite the need for a process and an end result that is worth it, relationships are at risk, and the rest of our lives are even at risk. Such precious commodities need a proven approach that isn't rooted in shaming or guilting you or your spouse into recovery, but in leading you down a road of discovery and healing and restoration. If that's where you find yourself, I hope you'll consider joining us at an upcoming EMS weekend. What you'll find there is this time-tested recovery plan that is led and supported by a staff that have all been where you are. Please, I invite you to check it out at the Fair Recovery website. All the dates and all the information are right there at your fingertips. So please give it a look if you find yourself in this situation. Thanks so much for joining me again, and I'll be back again next week. In the meantime, stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks so much.